Modern politics is all about the economy. When politicians brag, they point to the economy. When politicians smear each other, they point to the economy. When pundits and think tanks argue for one policy or another, what do they say? This will grow the economy. But there's a problem. A big problem. We can't actually measure the economy. Okay, sure, we can measure the GDP or the CPI, but those metrics are deeply, deeply flawed. Economics can give us models and numbers, but those numbers don't actually reflect human prosperity or well-being, because it turns out, when we try to measure the economy, things get very complicated very fast. The entire field of economics, all the think tanks and pundits and analysts are giving us numbers that don't actually tell us what we think they do. And it's all because of this one slimy, sleazy little bastard, John Maynard Keynes.
2 months ago, we were in an impossible position. The years passed. Our industry has been stressed by the exchange value of our money being 2 months ago, we were in an impossible position.
Keynes is probably the most influential economist of the 20th century. From central banking to Bidenomics to money printer go Burr, our federal government is completely overrun with Keynesians. Keynesian economics was intended to answer two simple questions. How can we measure the economy? And once we've measured it, how can we manipulate it? To answer this, the economists use the GDP.
As to GDP.
The GDP numbers were just announced.
We have GDP getting up to 4, 5, and even 6%.
Every politician, Democrat or Republican, uses the GDP as the metric of economic success. Even libertarians do this. Look, the GDP rises faster in a free market. Look, economic freedom directly correlates with GDP growth. All right, Heritage Foundation, we get it. So what is GDP? Well, it's gross domestic product, right? They add up all final goods and services produced in a nation's economy in a given year. The idea is, if I buy an apple for $1, that apple must be worth at least $1 to me. So if you add up the prices of everything anyone buys in a given year, that will give us a lower bound on the amount of value produced in the economy. If Americans buy $29 trillion of stuff, that stuff must be worth at least $29 trillion to them. But right off the bat, we run into a big problem. Inflation. Maybe you've heard of it. Buying a new car in the 50s cost like $2,000. Buying a new car today costs like $20,000. But that's not because a modern car provides 10 times as much value. It's because of inflation. Well, that's easy to fix. We'll just convert nominal GDP to real GDP. Basically, you keep the prices the same. If people buy 5 cars in 1950, that goes in the GDP as $10,000. If they buy 5 cars in 2024, that goes in the GDP as $10,000. Yay, we fixed it! Economists are so smart. Except no, because you can never trust an economist. They're all either mouthpieces of the regime or free market fundamentalists. In this case, the problem is pretty obvious. Technology changes. A car from 1950 just isn't as good as a car in 2024. In fact, a car in 2023 is not as good as a car in 2024 because technology is constantly changing. A toaster from 1950 is not as good as a toaster in 2024. Heck, even in the same year, some brands of toasters are better than others. They provide different amounts of value, so using the same price for all of them is unfair. So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Nominal GDP doesn't control for inflation, real GDP doesn't control for the changing quality of goods. No matter which we choose, our data is unreliable. But hold on, we're not done. You're not getting off that easy, economists. The GDP only includes formal market transactions, so it leaves out immaterial goods. Leisure, community, religion, strong families, culture. These are very important things that deeply affect people's happiness, but GDP can't measure them. GDP also leaves out externalities, the beauty of nature, clean air, good city planning. It can't measure any of those things, even though they are crucial for human flourishing. But the biggest blind spot of GDP is home production. GDP only includes what we buy and sell. It doesn't include what we make for ourselves, and it doesn't include gifts. If you have a backyard garden and grow your own tomatoes, you're creating value. But you don't pay yourself, so it's not counted in GDP. If you walk your neighbor's dog to be nice, that creates value. But because you're not being paid, it's not counted in GDP. So next time you're watching the news and they tell you that the GDP is rising, or the GDP is higher in this country than that country, take that with a planet-sized grain of salt. Next time some neocon think tank tells you that economic growth is correlated with liberalization, just know they're using the GDP, or some other metric like HDI or GPI, which can't fix the underlying problems. To create economic models, we have to make simplifying assumptions. But those assumptions are wrong. And when the models are wrong, the conclusions we draw from them aren't very useful. We're just playing pretend. We're making this imaginary little Lego world and moving around the pieces to see what happens.
We got them trees.
Yeah.
Hot style baby wolf and a hot style wolf. What's really cool is when you put the creeper right here, you can make him explode.
Honestly, I'm letting the economists off too easy. Not only is the method flawed, the fundamental logic behind GDP is completely wrong. Real GDP is meant to measure human welfare. The thought is that when people are able to buy the stuff they want, their lives are better. So the more stuff that's sold, the better, right? But selling people what they want doesn't necessarily improve their quality of life. People want things like pornography or heroin or crack or prostitution. There are many goods and services that people really want that are deeply harmful and addictive and destructive. So this consumer logic that buying stuff make life more gooder, the logic behind GDP is wrong. If the stuff being produced is vapes or junk food or brain rot entertainment, people's lives aren't getting better, they're getting worse. Because economics can't measure objective human welfare. It measures subjective preferences, desires. The free market is very good at getting consumers what they desire, but what they desire is often terrible because humans are fundamentally fallen and irrational creatures. Even when consumers want good things, they might overvalue them or undervalue them. So maximizing subjective preferences could be completely unrelated to maximizing objective benefits. That's what libertarians get wrong. Look, I've attended Mises U, I'm getting an econ minor from a very Austrian university. I know how they are. The libertarian economist will tell you that the free market is always good because both parties get what they want. Therefore, both parties are better off. Not necessarily. You're jumping from an is to an ought. Praxeology can tell us that both people get what they want, but it can't tell us if that's a good thing. If you've ever argued for literally anything besides complete laissez-faire capitalism, you've probably been told to go read an economics textbook. Take Econ 101. But Econ 101 or even Econ 404 cannot tell you which policies are good. Economics as a whole, whether that's the Chicago school or the neoclassical school or even the Austrian school, is all built on this fundamental equivocation between subjective value and objective benefit. Even Mises is guilty of this. If a man drinks wine and not water, I cannot say he is acting irrationally. At most, I can say that in his place I would not do so. But his pursuit of happiness is his own business, not mine. That's moral subjectivism. Another problem is the myth of the rational consumer. Even if we throw out traditional morality and embrace pure preference utilitarianism, free exchange still has problems. Humans try to satisfy our preferences, but we make mistakes. Imagine you go to a restaurant and the food looks good, so you pay $20. But when you eat it, the food is kind of bad. Turns out you would rather have kept the $20. Not only did you fail to maximize objective well-being, you couldn't even maximize your own preferences. Or what if you go to a movie because it looks interesting and it actually sucks? Or if you buy a product because the ads made it look awesome and it breaks after a week? In fact, all false or misleading advertisement leads to this problem.
I'm cool. And you're cool if you smoke me. NBC probably doesn't want me saying this directly to kids, but smoking makes you skinny and popular.
Now, these mistakes will grow less common over time if consumers get more rational, which is a big if. But even so, they still happen. In fact, this might be happening more than we realize. Monetary prices are so abstract that our human brains can't really think through the opportunity cost. When you spend $1.99 on milk, you don't think, my opportunity cost is 1/12,000th of a car, or 1/2,000th of a trip to Hawaii, or 1/2 of a dozen eggs. Ah, yes, the marginal value of this milk exceeds the opportunity cost. No, you just think, $1.99? I guess that sounds reasonable, sure, I'll buy it. Because econ is fundamentally a myth. Humans just don't think like that. We don't rationally calculate what we're giving up. The demand curve model assumes that we are quantitative creatures, but we are qualitative creatures. There isn't some exact price where I'd be willing to buy milk, but if you charged 1 penny more, I wouldn't buy it. There's no precise cutoff. My willingness to pay is wiggly and vague and based on cognitive bias. That's why grocery stores use all these silly psychological tricks. Bright colors, fronted shelves, prices that end in 99. Those stupid little tricks actually work. Because consumers aren't buying based on mathematical calculation. We don't have a numerical marginal utility. When we transform our vague and wiggly preferences into prices, we're fitting a square peg into a round hole. Preferences can't be quantified, and even if they could, they don't reflect objective well-being. And even if they did, you still couldn't aggregate them with GDP. Shut up, Keynes. Shut up, Friedman. Yes, even you, Mises, you subjectivistic, individualistic, liberal modernist. Everything you've been told about the economy is based on these fundamental fallacies. Every politician and pundit and news anchor makes these mistakes, and if we want to save economics, we need to go beyond them. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked my video, leave a like and a comment. You can say anything, just say, shut up, Keynes, and that will be a huge help for the algorithm. Click and watch this video right now, and I'll see you there. God bless America.
Smoking makes you skinny and popular.
Which watches over this country. 2 months ago, we were in an impossible position.